Welcome back to Papasphere, Dad Unplugged. I'm your host, Stephen Daniel, and today we're diving into something many of us struggle with: saying sorry and taking accountability. It's one of those things we all know is important, but sometimes our stubbornness gets the best of us. Let's start with a couple of stories that might sound familiar to you. First, we have Lori. Now, Lori is amazing, strong-willed, driven, and always right, or so she thinks. She and her husband had an argument about something pretty minor. Lori accuses her husband of something, but it turned out she was wrong. Assumptions and misunderstandings. You could say that mixed-up was innocent, but instead of admitting that she was wrong, Lori doubles down, refusing to accept any accountability. No sorry, nothing. Days go by and they're not speaking. All it would have taken was a simple, "I'm sorry, I screwed up," but her pride got in the way. On the flip side, we have George. George is a great guy, but when it comes to saying sorry, he's like a vault, locked up tight. He and his wife had a big argument over finances. She expressed how stressed she was about the budget, and instead of acknowledging her feelings, dismissed it, brushed her off. He knew he was wrong deep down, but no way he was going to be the first one to say sorry. Their relationship suffered for days, all because he couldn't bring himself to utter the two little words. Does both of those stories sound familiar? Today, we're talking about the power of those two words. I'm sorry. It's not always easy to say, but taking accountability and being willing to apologize can work wonders in a relationship. Whether you're like Lori, finding it hard to admit fault, or like George, stubborn about saying sorry. This episode will show you why breaking that cycle is so important and how it can make your relationship stronger. It's no secret, men are notoriously bad at saying sorry. Now, of course, not every man, but there's definitely a trend. In fact, research backs this up. Studies have shown that men apologize less frequently than women. According to a study published in the journal Psychological Science, men often don't see their actions as being apology-worthy as often as women do. But why is that? For many men, apologizing can feel like a sign of weakness or vulnerability. Society has long taught boys to be tough, independent, and self-reliant. From a young age, boys are often discouraged from expressing vulnerability. They may hear things like, "Don't cry, be a man," or "saying sorry is for girls." As a result, many men grow up with the belief that admitting fault undermines their strength and authority. So when it comes to saying sorry, it feels like a hit to their masculinity. This mindset sticks with them into adulthood. Apologizing can be viewed as losing control or giving up power in a relationship, so men might shy away from it altogether. They may not even realize that by refusing to say sorry, they're putting a wedge between themselves and their partner. On the other side, we have women who often have a hard time with accountability. Now, this might sound surprising because, as we know, women are more likely to apologize overall. But here's the catch. Women are often more empathetic and nurturing, which can lead to over-apologizing, even for things that aren't their fault. This constant apologizing can blur the lines of true accountability. So instead of owning up to the mistakes, some women might over-apologize in a way that doesn't address the real issue. Women also face societal pressures that shape how they deal with accountability. There's a push to maintain harmony, to avoid conflict, and sometimes to keep peace in relationships. But in recent years, modern toxic feminist messages have added a new layer, encouraging women not to say sorry at all or take accountability because they don't need to. This can leave women stuck, balancing between apologizing too much and not at all. Another challenge women face with accountability is the fear of judgment or criticism. Taking accountability can feel like exposing yourself to scrutiny. What if admitting you're wrong brings more judgment? What if people hold it against you? This fear can make it difficult for some women to fully own their mistakes in a relationship. In both cases, whether it's men holding back because of perceived weakness or women struggling with societal pressures and fear of judgment, the end result is the same: a relationship that doesn't get the healing it needs. How many times have you heard someone say, "I just want a sorry"? But let's be real. What they actually want goes beyond those two words. When someone asks for an apology, they're not just looking for you to say, "I'm sorry." What they truly want is accountability. When people seek an apology, they often want more than just hearing the words. They want the person to take responsibility for their actions. This means acknowledging the harm they did, show genuine remorse, and demonstrating that you understand the impact of your behavior. Essentially, they want you to not only know how they feel, but to really understand it. A heartfelt apology is more than just words. It's about taking responsibility and showing empathy. When you do that, the person on the receiving end feels heard, important, and valued. That's what makes all the difference. Now let's break this down. Apologizing and taking accountability are closely related, but they are distinct actions. Saying, "I'm sorry," is an expression of regret or remorse for something that happened. It's the first step, acknowledging that something went wrong. But taking accountability goes a step further. It's not just saying you were wrong, but owning the mistake and taking action to make it right. Accountability means accepting responsibility, making amends, and actively working to prevent the same mistake from happening again. An apology can be part of taking accountability, but true accountability involves actions that show that you are willing to change. In a relationship, it's crucial to do both. Saying sorry without accountability can feel empty, and taking accountability without saying sorry can feel incomplete. Think of it like this. Saying sorry is the key that unlocks the door, but taking accountability is what opens it wide and allows real healing to take place. When you do both, your partner will know that not only do you regret what happened, but you are willing to put in the effort to make sure it doesn't happen again. That's how trust gets built, and that's how relationships grow stronger. Now, let's talk about the negative consequences of not saying sorry and taking accountability, followed by the positive effects of doing both. Let's start with the bad news. Not saying sorry and failing to take accountability in a relationship can have serious consequences. One of the biggest issues is how it destroys trust. When one partner consistently avoids taking responsibility, it erodes the foundation of trust. And we all know trust is the cornerstone of any strong relationship. Without it, things can go from rocky to downright toxic. Avoiding accountability builds resentment. When problems don't get addressed and no apologies are made, one partner is left to carry the weight of unresolved issues. Over time, that resentment builds up bit by bit until it becomes a wall between the two of you. And what happens when you keep avoiding taking responsibility? It messes up communication. When one partner stops taking accountability, both partners can eventually stop communicating altogether. The silent treatment phase. No one talks, nothing gets resolved, and slowly but surely, you drift apart. The lack of communication creates emotional distance. One partner starts to feel undervalued and unheard. And when that happens, intimacy goes out the window. You wouldn't even want to be in the same room together, let alone be close. What's left is a growing pile of suppressed guilt, shame, and anger. It's like shaking a bottle of champagne. All the emotions get bottled up and eventually it's going to explode. And when it does, it's usually over something so small and insignificant that you wonder how it got to that point. So, not saying sorry and avoiding accountability, it leads to a toxic cycle of anger, distance, and a whole lot of problems. But let's flip it and talk about the positives. Saying sorry and taking accountability can have just as big an impact. When you take responsibility for your actions, you show your partner that you are honest and trustworthy. Transparency builds the trust back up, and it helps both partners learn and grow from their mistakes. There's no room for resentment because you've shown that you value your partner's feelings enough to make amends. Communication also gets a major boost. When both sides feel heard and understood, it opens up a path to talk about anything. And let's face it, that's crucial for a healthy relationship. You're not avoiding difficult conversations anymore because you both know you can work through them. Taking accountability also shows that you're willing to put your partner's feeling above your own pride. The connection you build when you own your mistakes, it's powerful. The pain of the mistakes fades, and the frustration doesn't hang around. You won't be driving angry or giving each other the cold shoulder when it's bedtime. You'll move on faster with no prolonged drama. And the more you practice saying sorry and taking accountability, the easier it gets. It becomes second nature, and the relationship grows stronger with every genuine apology and act of accountability. Trust me, when both partners are willing to step up, own their mistakes, and prioritize each other's feelings, the relationship thrives. And isn't that what we're all aiming for? Let me share my personal experience with this. I'm someone who always wants to fix things, especially when it comes to problems in my relationship. It's just in my nature. And I think a lot of men can relate to this. We are hardwired to be problem solvers. If there's a lingering issue, we want to deal with it, fix it, and move on. I absolutely hate having unresolved problems hanging over my head. In the past, I used to want to address things immediately. I'd try to fix it right then and there because I couldn't stand the idea of letting it simmer. But I had to learn something that took me some time. You need to let things settle before jumping into a conversation. That's a topic for another episode, though. Now, my wife, she's amazing, but for the longest time, she had a really hard time saying sorry. And when I tried to force an apology out of her, it usually ended up coming out wrong, angry, or non-genuine. Sometimes I didn't get an apology at all, and all I managed to do was make things worse. Forcing it never worked. I had to realize that just hearing the words "I'm sorry" wasn't enough if it didn't come from a real place. After a lot of frustration, I prayed about it and I started getting answers in unexpected places through people I follow, like Mel Robbins, and from books I read that helped me gain some perspective. One of the biggest things I learned was to express how I felt and then walk away. I stopped trying to force the issue. Instead of pushing for an apology, I'd let it be. And this was the key. By walking away, I stopped giving her the opportunity to turn the tables on me. See, in the past, she'd often flip the situation into a critique of how I reacted. And that became the new argument. But when I let her be, and there was no more reaction for her to point at, she had to sit with it. Over time, she started feeling more guilty about the original issue. And then, when things calmed down, she would come to my office and apologize on her own. For me, that's all it takes. I don't need grand gestures or drawn-out conversations. If you say you're sorry and I feel that you understand what happened and take ownership of your part, I forgive instantly. To me, it's like it never happened. The more we practiced this, the faster the apologies came and the less chaos we found ourselves in. It was like a domino effect, but in a good way. I try to do all of this because I know that my 3 boys are always watching. And let me tell you, kids aren't as dumb as some people make them out to be. They're always listening and learning, even when we think they're not paying attention. I want my boys to know what it looks like for a man to love his wife properly. There's no winner in an argument. There's no need to always be right. What's important is that they learn how to take responsibility for their actions, and that saying sorry is a huge part of having a successful marriage. At the end of the day, my goal isn't just to have a good relationship with my wife. It's to raise boys who understand how to build strong, loving relationships of their own one day. And I believe that starts with showing them the value of accountability, humility, and saying sorry when it matters most. Before we wrap up today, let's take a moment to reflect on everything we just talked about. In this episode, we've explored the importance of saying sorry and taking accountability. We've seen how failing to do so can lead to broken trust, resentment, and emotional distance. But we've also learned that by owning our mistakes, we can rebuild trust, strengthen communication, and grow closer to our partners. The Bible teaches us a lot about relationships, humility, and the power of reconciliation. One verse that stands out is Ephesians chapter 4, verse 32, which says, "Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as Christ God forgave you." God calls us to live with humility, compassion, and a heart that's ready to forgive and make peace. Saying sorry isn't just about admitting you're wrong. It's about embracing the humility that God asks us to show. It's about putting aside pride and choosing love and respect for the person you're sharing your life with. In a marriage, we're called to lift each other up, and that includes owning up to our mistakes and making things right. A marriage built on accountability, honesty, and grace is one that reflects the kind of love God wants for us. So if you're in a place where things feel strained, if you've been holding on to pride or avoiding the words "I'm sorry," I encourage you to take that step today. Don't wait any longer. Start the conversation. Let your partner know that you're willing to take accountability, not just for the sake of ending an argument, but because you genuinely want to build a stronger, healthier relationship. I promise you, it's worth it. This episode was all about the power of saying sorry, but there's another part to this story, and that's forgiveness. In the next episode, we'll dive into the importance of forgiving each other and how forgiveness can truly set your relationship free. So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, I want to thank you for joining me today on Papasphere Dad Unplugged. If this episode resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on how you can apply these lessons to your relationship. And remember, none of this happens overnight. It's a rough journey, but each step you take will bring you closer to the marriage you want to build. I'm Stephen Daniel, and this has been Papasphere. And don't forget to share this podcast with someone who might need a little encouragement in their relationship. Thanks for listening. And remember, taking accountability isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength, humility, and love. I love you, I appreciate you, and always remember to smile.